Good morning, friends. Welcome to Ecoholics YouTube channel. My name is Avinash Agarwal, and in this video, I'll be doing a small experiment with the methodology that we use to discuss current affairs with you on a daily basis. So, we have been doing these lectures for last 45 days almost. We started on 1st May and we are sitting on 15th of June. And I see that there is a small gap in the methodology that we have been following, and that gap is that we are not providing you any solution so far as, let us say, revising what we have already discussed is concerned. There is no looking back. We keep moving ahead. Well, that is fantastic in terms of making progress, but making progress also entails making sure that everything that we have discussed, everything that we have already spoken about, we are able to also carry that ahead. If you are not able to carry that ahead, there is no meaning in the progress that we may be making. So the underlying idea of this particular session is that I want to quickly walk you through everything that we had discussed from 8th of May till, let us say, 15th of May. Whatever lectures were conducted in this time span from 8th of May to 15th of May, I want to quickly walk you through all the articles. Now, anybody who has been following this series regularly, the challenge for you would be that do you have a recall of these articles? Do you have a very short summary of these articles, A, in your books or notebooks, and B, in your mind? And if not, then you need to kind of do that. And if you haven't watched these sessions from, let's say, 8th May to 15th of May, 1 month old sessions, then this is your opportunity to catch up. Because as you can see that I mean, you may not be able to see, but this is a mega document in the sense that it's a 117 page document, right? And roughly the word count of this document is around 10,000 words. Okay, so it's not easy to grasp 10,000 words worth of content in one session itself, but I want to quickly walk you through everything that we have discussed so that you have a sense of everything that we have covered. Going ahead, what I want to do is that maybe I'll try to give more structure to this Saturday activity. This will be a Saturday activity. Another reason why I want to do this activity on Saturday is that typically, you all know that I have been following only one newspaper, that is Mint. So again, there is no reason why you need to follow only Mint and not Business Standard, or only Business Standard and not Mint. I just selected Mint because you just need to follow one newspaper properly and you will have a very good sense of things that are happening around you. Okay, which is what the purpose of this exercise is, to give you a sense of what's happening around you, right? So the idea is that on Saturdays it becomes slightly difficult to gather content from Mint because the flavor of the newspaper is in a completely different direction on Saturdays. It talks a lot about society, about cinema, about books, about ecology, about culture, about art, about a lot of these things, right? So I struggle a lot to find your kind of articles in, let's say, Mint on Saturday, right? So I have to run helter skelter. So that's one problem that I want to solve for myself. And another problem that I want to solve for you guys is the problem of revision, where you don't look back at all. So I want to solve that problem. Okay, so how do I plan to solve that problem? By running you through this entire document in the next half an hour. Okay, so typically, as you all know, that there are like 3 articles that we discussed on a daily basis on an average, 2 to 3 articles, and I'm having 5 to 6 days worth of content over here. So that basically means that I'm having anywhere between 15 to 20 articles over here. So 15 to 20 articles, I just want to speak for a couple of minutes on each article so that you have a recall and a fair sense of what we had discussed in these articles. So that's the basic outline of this particular session, right? So I hope that for regular viewers of this session, this makes sense. Okay, so let's start with infrastructure financing guidelines. So you may recall that RBI is tinkering with infrastructure financing guidelines, and banks may not be very happy, right? So the basic idea was that RBI is coming out with this draft guidelines on project loans so that only serious players are in this particular space of infrastructure lending. Okay, so the main idea was that they want to increase the standard asset provisioning to 1 to 5% of loans from the current 0.4% in a consortium manner, right? So the moment you start taking these kinds of steps, so banks have to set aside a greater amount of money in the form of provisioning, right? To make sure that tomorrow if there is a non-performing asset ka problem, then we are able to solve it. There were furthermore, restrictions, or there may be requirements that individual lenders who are a part of consortium, they have to take 10% exposure in infrastructure project worth 1500 crore and 5% or 150 crore, whichever is higher, right? So that's so the idea being that if you are actually participating, then participate meaningfully, otherwise don't participate, right? And another idea was that you can call for moratorium on repayment for only 6 months from the start of commercial operations of the project. Okay, and another idea was that there would be a reduction in the net present value during construction due to factors like change in projected cash flow, and that will lead to credit impairment, right? So these were some of the major changes that were suggested by the RBI. We had discussed the pros and cons around these measures, and why banks are not willing to play ball in this kind of an activity. The next article that we had come across was related to bank frauds, right? And the basic idea being that Supreme Court had come out with some guidelines regarding that banks must provide a proper hearing, right, and an opportunity to, let us say, somebody whose account is being declared as fraud. Okay, so Supreme Court waded into this territory, and this article discussed that this is a difficult situation for banks, because the idea is that if let's say banks are declaring somebody as for a fraud account, right, then they are doing that after all the due diligence. Now the risk is that because of this verdict of Supreme Court, we are risking the progress that we have made in case of in the cause of establishing credit discipline, in the sense that banks have done a lot of hard work in terms of making sure that borrowers remain disciplined, that they have the fear of God as well as CIBIL when they are, let's say, defaulting on loans, etc. Now if Supreme Court suddenly creates an option that if your account is getting declared as fraud and you have certain legal options available to you, then a lot of people will start taking recourse to those legal options, despite the fact that bank has already given them a long rope before declaring their account as fraud. So this was the basic crux of the article that we had discussed. Then there was this article regarding state level plans to battle extreme weather. So we already have a NCDC, that is National Center for Disease Control. We already have national level plans, but we also need to have adaptive capacities at the state level, right? We need to be able to take care of a variety of diseases that keep popping up across the year, right? And we have this national program on climate change and human health. That is a fantastic thing, but apart from that, we also need to have local level plans and state level plans. That was the crux of this article. We cited UNICEF's report, The Climate Crisis is a Child Rights Crisis, Introducing Children's Climate Risk Index, right? So we need to have this focused approach upon different demographics. Like for instance, how is climate change going to impact the elderly? How is climate change going to impact, let us say, farmers? How is climate change likely to impact children? How is climate change likely to impact coastal dwellers, right? So these are your, how do you say? These are your, focused or niche areas where you need to do a lot of, focused work, so to speak. So yeah, definitely this is a point of concern, right? And UNICEF had estimated that 25% of children in India, they are experiencing high or extremely high water vulnerability, right? So these are some of the ideas that got discussed in this article. Moving ahead, we discussed a lot about financial savings, right? So lowering of financial savings aren't a cause for alarm, because this particular article, so we had discussed two articles in this particular space. So there has been a lowering of financial savings. You know that households can save money, but they can save money in a variety of different formats. They can save money in the form of financial savings. They can also save money in the form of assets such as, let us say, real estate assets. Okay. So lower financial savings doesn't mean that savings as a whole has come down, is what this article is trying to say. It's just saying that people have shifted their money away from, let us say, financial savings to other kinds of savings. Okay. And there is another article that we come across that we had discussed, which says that no, this is not the case. Lowering of financial savings doesn't really reflect in an increase in savings in other forms or in other assets. So this is something that we really need to be worried about. Okay. So I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of this article. If you have discussed, if you have seen this discussion, then fantastic. Otherwise, please have a look at the discussion and please go through this article. The next article was talking about India's unpredictable farm trade policy, right? So every now and then we impose bans upon exports and imports, right? Every now and then we create limits, arbitrary limits upon stocking, and force private stockists, etc., to relinquish the material that they have gathered in the form of their regular business. So when you have an unpredictable farm trade policy, so suddenly what happens is that you will allow imports if prices go up, so that prices cool down, and that causes a loss to Indian farmers, because if they can benefit from those high prices, you are not letting them benefit from those high prices. Similarly, let us say that farmers can export and make a meaningful profit from abroad, but because of that export, availability in the domestic market may go down and prices may increase. So you slam a brake on exports. You do not allow the farmers to export. So essentially this article was talking about the urban food consumer bias that is there inherently in our policies, in the sense that we always try to tame inflation, and we are not so concerned or bothered about, let us say, making farmers profit healthy, or making a jump up in farmers profit. So this is what this article is discussing. Moving ahead, yeah, we will. So this particular infographic shows you very clearly over here that the value of India's farm exports, they fell due to export curbs. So you can see that from 20 to 23 there is at least a 20% reduction from the top, at least a 20% reduction from the top, from what we exported in, let's say, 22-23 to what we exported in, let us say, 23-24. This kind of an analysis should be a part of your vocabulary. Okay. Thereafter, we discussed this article regarding how income tax, personal income tax, and corporate income tax are, behaving relative to each other. So here we discussed that you can see over here that personal income tax, if you look at direct taxes, right? So there are two major direct taxes that we are collecting, right? So first is your corporate income, personal income tax, and the other is your corporate income tax. Okay. So personal income tax is what, like, let's say people like you and me pay. Corporate income tax is, let us say, something like a Reliance Industries Limited or any business establishment or a corporate will pay. So you can see that personal income tax is now commanding a larger share of direct taxes, larger share than at least corporate income tax. Okay, so that's point number one. And if you look at the share of these taxes in nominal GDP, then again you see that personal income tax is higher than corporate income tax, right? And this trend that we are witnessing in India, where the personal income tax is now having upper hand over corporate income tax, this is also something that we see in other countries such as US, Canada, UK. So this is what the basic crux of the article is. I remember discussing why this has happened, what are the steps that were taken to make sure that personal income tax growth is good. Why is it that corporate income tax has been languishing? What were the causes which has pushed corporate income tax down? So please look at this article and this discussion, and it will make sense to you. Okay. Moving ahead to the next article. Expedite insolvency resolutions for IBC to shine as a star reform. This was a very beautiful article that we had discussed, where we dug in deep into why IBC was introduced, what was the context in which it was introduced, okay, and what are the problems with IBC, right? So we had seen that recovery rate is coming down. We had seen that the average resolution time is taking a longer amount of time, right? We are seeing that appeal pay appeal kind of an approach gets taken, as a result of which a lot of time gets taken, right? Apart from that, there are you know uh, so the point is that conflicting guidelines have been issued by various courts at different point of time. So a lot of pendency has been witnessed. We discussed what the Standing Committee on Finance is saying regarding all of these things. So all these things were discussed as well. Okay, there are certain interpretation issues as well. So, like for instance, how do you interpret the letter of the law? Because when you have multiple different cases and you have multiple different interpretations, that isn't very helpful. Okay. The next article that we had come across was fiscal deficit, right? We have talked so much about fiscal deficit that I probably feel that now I should not talk about fiscal deficit for another 1 month. So we have been able to overachieve our fiscal deficit targets in the current year. We are likely to overachieve our fiscal deficit targets in the coming year. That's what the basic crux of all of these articles was. Because of why we have been able to do this is that our revenue has been good. There has been a lot of buoyancy in GST. Direct tax collection has also been good. On the other hand, the government has had a very hawkish stance upon expenditure management. They have made sure that expenditure doesn't get ballooned up unnecessarily. Simultaneously, we have also discussed the fact that RBI gave Government of India a bonanza in the form of an unprecedented transfer of surplus, double of what was expected. So as a result of all of these things combined together, we have been overachieving our fiscal deficit targets, and going ahead, we are likely to perform well in the next year as well, because of these trends coming together. In the previous month, we spoke a lot about Indian spices, right? So India is a reasonably strong exporter of spices. So as you can see, that in the previous year, financial year, that is 23-24, we had exported approximately 35,000 crore or $4.25 billion worth of spices from India. And our major destinations are China, Singapore, US, European market, and so on. And there were certain concerns regarding contamination in our spices, right? Particularly from major brands such as, let us say, MDH and Everest. Not just them, but maybe others as well. So there are certain supply chain related issues that are like that are bogging this particular sector down. Whether it is contamination with salmonella, or whether it is contamination with, let us say, fertilizer or pesticide kind of residues, chemicals, which are basically hazardous to health, right? So these contamination related issues has caused rejection of Indian spices at the entry point in our important export markets. A lot of countries have started scrutinizing, started testing spices from India in a much more detailed and an elaborate manner, because of the fear of contamination and the public health associated concerns that that contamination raises. So this is a very serious matter, because as you can see, that significant amount of exports is going from India to these countries. A lot of people are employed in this value chain in India. If, let us say, these problems persist and India's brand image deteriorates in those countries, then that's not good, neither for revenue nor for job creation, nor for agricultural exports. This is not good, nor for income of farmers this is good. So we discussed a lot around this issue in the previous month, right? So if you have not watched, please just have a look at it. Thereafter, this was a very beautiful article which was speaking about the fact that we need to explore new markets amid geopolitical conflicts. Okay, so it was a very contextualized article. Like for instance, for iron ore, which are the new markets that we can target, right? For engineering goods, which are the new markets that we can target? For drugs and pharmaceuticals, which are the new markets that we can target, right? For electronic goods, which are the new markets that we can target? For for agriculture and processed food products, which are the markets that we can target. And I remember requesting you guys that please, even if you are obviously you will not be able to remember all these countries, neither do you have to remember these countries, but please remember this approach, and please advocate for this approach when you are writing your answers or giving your answers, that we need to identify which items are our areas of strength, where we have the relative competitive advantage or the absolute competitive advantage, as the case may be, right? And then once that identification has been done, then those items, then we need to do a simultaneous exercise in terms of identifying markets or gaps where we can push these exports out or push these goods out in the form of exports. So both these things need to be done. That A, we need to look internally and identify areas of opportunity, and B, we need to look externally and map areas of opportunity with, let us say, markets abroad. Okay, and that is the kind of exercise that has been done over here. So whenever I'm sure that in every exam at least once you get to speak about exports and how you want to promote exports from India, etc., etc. So please do speak about all of these things. Okay. There was this one-off article that I had covered from Economics and Political Weekly, that is the truncated tax. Okay, so this truncated tax thing is basically talking about GST, right? So it was a deep dive into all the problems related to GST, right? So initially it gave a sense of the GST collection that is happening, what are the averages, how is the trend behaving, etc., etc., right? How does the GST collection typically behave across the year, right? And thereafter we had started discussing a variety of problems that are beset are currently affecting the GST system right now in India. So the collection of taxes, for instance, varies across states. Okay, apart from that, the effective GST rate in India is now quite low because of constant lobbying from a variety of different forces, which has pushed the effective GST rate quite below what it was initially meant to be, right? So if we speak about political compulsion and the fact that we want to curtail inflation and the fact that we want to give a feel good factor to a lot of people, to a lot of lobbies, right? So we have spoken a lot about that. We have also spoken about the fact that there is constant tinkering with the rates, right? So all of that was also discussed over here. Okay, and apart from that, we also discussed the gross GST collection to GDP ratio. Okay, and we said that it reached 6.4%, right? And the fact that it has not reached the pre-GST levels, in the sense that prior to the GST regime, if you look at the combined indirect tax collection as a percentage of GDP, then you will see that those combined indirect taxes as a percentage of GDP were roughly around 6.4%, right? And we have still not reached that level, right? So we are still around 5.5 or 6% or something like that, right? So when do we exactly plan to reach that, right? So we are still around 6.13%. So you can see that after so many years of introduction of GST, we are still languishing to reach the pre-GST levels and surpass it. Surpass it will come ahead, but first we need to reach there, right? So, and then we had also seen that compensation cess in itself is an important issue. So as you can see that I'm not exactly trying to walk you through this article again within a span of 2 minutes. That is not what the agenda is. What I'm trying to tell you is that you need to be mindful that yes, these are the articles that you need to see. Okay, thereafter, for mid-income level, education is crucial for India. So this article speaks about human capital formation, that we need to make sure that human capital formation is going ahead in the right direction, right? So this is a fairly easy to predict article. What it would say, it would speak about education, the state of education, what it should be, what it is, etc., etc. So it shouldn't be too difficult, honestly, right? So yeah, that's about this particular article. Moving ahead to the next one, we had spoken about stock indices. That do stock indices have any correlation with economic growth? So based on data, we were able to conclude that in many years when economy did well, stock market did not do well. In many years that economy did not do well, stock market did exceedingly well. And thereafter we concluded that the the coefficient of correlation, right, between, let us say, economic growth and between, let us say, the stock market performance is not so strong. Whereas we were able to establish that the coefficient of correlation between, let us say, the stock market performance and the profit of the underlying nifty companies, right? So that there is a very strong or a high correlation over there, right? As it should be, because if, let us say, certain companies are doing well, then you are likely to purchase their stocks, and if they are not doing well, then you are unlikely to purchase their stocks. As simple as that, right? So this was the kind of discussion. It's a very beautiful discussion. Thereafter, we had spoken about how India's inclusive innovation can shape the world's digital future. How digital the digital public infrastructure that India has created, how it can be a playbook not just for India but for others as well. So whether it is UPI, or whether it is Aadhaar enabled transactions, or whether it is Jan Dhan Yojana kind of transactions, right? So or whether it is anything that we have been doing off late. So the world has been sitting up and taking notice, not only regarding, let us say, our UPIs, but also regarding the CoWIN platform that we created to systematically track the vaccinations that were delivered to large population in India. This article spoke about informal enterprises. They have been the data on informal enterprises has been kept under wraps. It is not being shared openly. So multiple such articles have been discussed around data related issues, right? If you have any doubt, please feel free to reach out. Thereafter, we discussed this very important article on raising minimum wages or adopting living wage approach. So, we established that there is a huge variation in wages across states in India, minimum wages. B, we established that we are now welcoming or involving ILO in our, minimum wage revision exercise that we are doing. So we established that India's national floor level minimum wage was last set in 2017, and it is one of the lowest in the entire region that we are a part of, right? So we need to do something about it, and we don't need to necessarily just focus on minimum wages. We need to start talking about living wages, because if a person is unable to, let us say, take care of their living expenses, then what's the point of working, is a basic question that the entire population is asking, right? Thereafter, we discussed a lot of data points, right? So we saw that global growth will be the strongest in India as compared to a lot of other developing countries and a lot of other developed countries. Okay, policy progress. So central banks, they are marching to different beats now. We have discussed this a couple of times. Like, for instance, very recently we discussed that the European Central Bank has started reducing their policy rates, whereas the United States Federal Reserve is still holding the policy rate at a pretty high level. So the direction that a variety of major central banks that they are taking can be varied depending upon what the local domestic conditions look like. So as we speak, the G7 summit is ongoing in Italy, if I'm not wrong, right? And I'm reasonably sure that there will be a commentary that will be coming out of G7 around this issue that different countries are marching in different directions. So this was a very good article that we had discussed. This particular infographic is speaking about the debt crisis. As you can see, that emerging and developed economies have a much lower debt as a percentage of GDP as compared to advanced economies. So it's not just our problem, it's also their problem. There was this article that was discussed quite a bit in the previous month, that AstraZeneca, the manufacturer of Covishield, so what was called Covishield in India, was called by some other name outside of India, and that was manufactured by AstraZeneca. And AstraZeneca kind of admitted that yes, there is a possibility that because of our vaccines, right, because of our vaccines, there can be some rare blood clots that can cause some kind of problem, or not just some kind of a problem, probably even death, due to certain cardiological issues. So they admitted that yes, this is a possibility. Now a case is ongoing in a variety of jurisdictions against them, that they knew this and yet they administered, yet they released those vaccines in the larger society, as a result of which a lot of people have had to go through bereavement, loss of loved ones, and etc. So yeah, that's something that is getting discussed right now. rising heat. We have spoken a lot about heat waves, etc. So I'm not going to talk about that again with you guys, right? This was a very beautiful article regarding China's clean tech subsidies. So a lot of governments across the world, they blame China for subsidizing its industries, how it harms the other countries' industries, how China is creating overcapacities and flooding variety of markets with cheap products, etc. But this particular article, in this article, the author says that if China is actually giving huge amounts of subsidies, which are, helping in the mass production of green goods, or goods which can help in generation of renewable energy, or goods which can help in transition towards sustainability, then what's the harm in it? There is no harm in it, right? Because if China is doing it, so China is basically serving a larger cause of the humanity. Now, don't think that this article was written by some Chinese economists or a think tank, or by some sympathizer. This was written by a very renowned and eminent economist. I forget the name. I think it was Danny Roderick or somebody, right? So anyways, so these were the articles that we had discussed in the time span from, let's say, 8th of May to 15th of May. This was just an experiment that we are doing. I will refine this exercise going ahead. I'll try to find time. I will try to see how we can refine this exercise that we have just done. But I've given you, I may have given two things to regular and proper viewers of my lecture series. I may have given you a quick summary recap of what we have discussed, right? Or B, I may have given you the motivation to open your notes from that time period and have a look at them again, maybe because you're not having them completely at your fingertips. That's either of these two things is a good thing, right? Having a idea that, okay, yes, we had discussed this, I remember it, that's also a good thing to achieve. Idea that, okay, I really need to revise because I had read this, I had watched this, I had heard about this, but I don't really recall it, so I do want to revise it. That's also a good thing. So anybody who is watching these sessions regularly, I wish you all the best. Give me your suggestions and feedbacks. I'll meet you again on Monday. Until then, thank you so much. All the best and Jai Hind. Bye bye.